Hi everyone, and welcome back to Herzography. Today I'd like to discuss with you composition, the different composition tricks, if you will, as well as the technique that I have been using over the years when I go out in the field, regardless if I am just practicing, if I'm shooting flowers or mainly shooting landscape images, what I kind of look for and how I go about with visualizing and composing my subject. The importance of composition can't be understated. It is really the fastest method to bring your photography technique really up to speed to show off what you can do. Basically, what we're trying to do is to take the 3D or three-dimensional visual space that we live in, capture it on a two-dimensional medium, but we're trying to keep that three-dimensional look to our images. Now, there are a couple of different ways to accomplish this. One way is to use leading lines, and these leading lines help the viewer kind of move from one area of an image to another area of the image. It also helps perhaps take away a foreground that is maybe a little too busy by using these leading lines, or sometimes you want to start at the foreground. Also, we have come to love a low light source, meaning low in the sky, whether it be the morning light or the evening light. Having a low light cast shadows and gives your images more detail and more dimension. All right, so let's get started and we'll look at some images and I'll show you kind of what I see as I'm visualizing out in the field. So I'm here in Procreate and I'm going to start with this image in Yosemite Valley. So in this image you can see, and it's a very famous location, you have this perfect V coming down here and the moving water here. I used a long shutter speed to enhance the water movement here, as well as in the waterfall in the back right. But this is a very classic look where having these two mountain ranges form that valley, and it just helps give a very natural look to where your eyes just will naturally come in to the center of the image. Now this image of the lighthouse in Portland, once again, this is a little bit different because here I've taken the main part of the image and I justified it off to the left to kind of help with the 2/3, the rule of 2/3. Now that being said, this image is a little different because I shot it with a 6x12 format, so I have a lot of extra space from the in the 2/3 area, so it really kind of helped accentuate this part here, with the waves coming in. And yeah, there's a lot of extra space here. I could probably crop this image over here and still wind up with a very nice image with the lighthouse justified on the left-hand side. So using that format, I kind of worked with, well, where do I want the extra space if I need it, if I was going to use it for wrapping around a canvas or something like that. So that's why I decided to compose this image this way. Also, you can probably see there's, not sure if you can, there's a lighthouse in the distance here. So I wanted that lighthouse to be close to center. When you really go in on this image, you can see this other lighthouse being right there in the center of the image. You can see it a lot easier on prints. So I wanted to make sure that that stayed close to center. So however I decided to crop this image in production, I'd have plenty of space to work with. All right, this image taken up at Acadia National Park shows this wonderful little duck right here going in this direction. So I wanted to make sure that I had this negative space over here. I kept the horizon fairly centered. My assistant, otherwise known as my wife, was over here on the right-hand side, and as soon as I gave her the word, she went ahead and started clapping, and so this duck came swimming out, and I was able to get one shot of this beautiful image. I believe this is a lake called Eagle Lake, and I took this first thing in the morning to get that nice texture in the trees over here. But once again, I felt that this composition in this particular location, having kind of like a V here and almost like having a larger V here, really brings your eye more into the center, and then it helps be accentuated a bit by this duck moving from right to left. So I felt that this image really kind of worked well the way it kind of came out. All right, and let's take a look. You know, along those same lines of leading lines, let's take a look. Here's one that I took. I wish I had taken this later in the evening, but the park closed, so I wasn't able to. So I just took it with a little bit of clouds. And the thing that I really like about this is that, you know, the cactus, I wanted to make sure I kind of went from the large cactus on the left to smaller and smaller right down to the rock. And so, you know, I kept that rock in the center, basically the center line of the image, but I used the cactuses and positioned myself such that they would be large on the left and then slowly would start to get smaller and smaller, leading your eye from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. There's a cactus over here on the right. I think if I was going to print this, I'd probably crop it a little bit more, maybe from the top and a little bit from the right-hand side. But this kind of work, showing these leading lines from the left to the right. Okay, here's one at Venice Beach in California. Once again, leading lines. You know, leading lines are great. I have the leading lines going in from the right-hand side. Basically, they are both going in from about a third of the way up, and they both lead into the center. You know, so once your eye is here, then all of a sudden you're looking at the motion of these clouds. I used a neutral density filter, and I believe on this one that bird just was very nice and stood very still for me during this long exposure, so that worked out well. Probably if I was going to print, you know, I'd probably kind of make the dust or the sand a little bit smoother and do some things like that. But this is the way the image just turned out right out of the camera, and I was very pleased. Once again, this composition with the V from right to left coming into the center. This image here of this winter stream, what I really liked about this was the way I had the water come from the left to, and it kind of circled around, circled from left to right to left again. It really helps bring your eye in from the woods, not seeing where the water is coming from, but as it kind of circles around. Using once again a neutral density filter to get a little bit of movement in that water, just kind of helps your eye flow from the center to the right and then to the left again. This is another cactus image. As you can probably tell, living in Arizona, we get a lot of cactus images out here. And this one was taken at a park, and I did the same thing. I made sure that I had an angle where I was taking the larger cactuses in this case. Sometimes it's hard to move in the brush. You have to be careful of snakes and such. But from the larger cactuses on the left, getting smaller on the right, and then a neutral density filter, or I believe in this case it was a infrared filter that gave a longer exposure, so I got some movement in the clouds. And I was very happy at the composition, the way this worked out. I did keep these mountains. I wanted them more in the center, so just shifting your position around and looking at which is going to be the best angle from left to right, top and down. That's why I usually recommend, and if you've seen my other videos, I usually recommend that, you know, before you set up your tripod, or set up your tripod but don't put your camera on it, and then walk around with your camera and decide, you know, what's going to be the best angle for the composition. And that being said, when I am looking through the viewfinder like that, I usually have my viewfinder on black and white. Not because I'm going to necessarily convert the image to black and white, but I think when you're shooting in with the image on the viewfinder in black and white, it's just much easier to tell where the lines are, and composing and your composition is easier because you're not distracted by a lot of colors. And so my viewfinder on landscape mode is always on black and white. This image here, you know, your focus goes right to the center because I have the waterfalls, and I took this particular angle to kind of show everything was moving towards that center. Instead of taking it from a side angle, I wanted to get close and as far overhead as I could without falling in. And so I really like the way this composition turned out on this this waterfall here. Here is a classic view of under a pier, and of course the leading lines moving from the top left and right, they all come and verge down right to that center point. And it works not only from the top but also from the bottom. So it's a very classic view under a pier, and I love the way, you know, the leading lines here, just it all works. And I use a neutral density filter to blur out as much as I could the water and the waves, because I didn't want any of that to be distracting. I encourage you to try some different things, try some different shutter speeds, and then if you need to use a neutral density filter, to try that and see what's going to work out best for you. Let's go to this image of the Lone Cypress on the 17-mile drive. Very, very famous tree. And this was just a classic view. I was able to find a location to be able to basically get the foreground and the sides in the shadows. So there's no detail in there. Once again, this image is just a raw file, and so you have your eye being scooped down, if you will, from the left and the right into the center of the image. And it, to me, the composition just falls together really, really well. There are some nice clouds up on here, and the image, you know, once again, it just felt right. Sometimes you can just feel these things when you move around and you say, oh yeah, I'm not sure why, but that just works. And then later on, or in your camera, looking at black and white, or at some point, you're going to say, oh, this is why this works. This particular image, on a side note, was printed at a printer in Los Angeles, and then it was used on a sci-fi series called Babylon 5, and it's actually hanging in the captain's quarters. So I was very proud to see that being used. On this image of the very famous shipwreck in Northern California, Point Reyes, which you can just make out on the boat right there. And I enjoy negative space. So yes, there's a lot of negative space in the sky as well as the water. Once again, I didn't want the water to be distracting, so I used a neutral density filter and did a long exposure to blur out the background. This just seemed to really work with this being just off a little bit from center, as opposed to, I believe I wasn't able to move my viewing over more to the left to put this really at 2/3, but I still have plenty of area that, you know, to be able to crop afterwards. One of the nice things that if you're using a larger sensor, you don't worry about as much, or you might use some other software so you can increase or interpolate your image to a larger file size. I used to always talk about getting it right in the camera, but sometimes I feel that you want to give a little extra space around. You don't know if this is going to once again wrap on canvas, and then you'll need some extra file size instead of going with black or blank edges when you do a canvas wrap. It also gives you more options if you decide to do a vertical or leave it at horizontal. So, you know, in thinking of those things, I always have the rule of 2/3 grid up on my viewfinder in the screen, so it just kind of gives me an idea of where things are kind of lay out. As a little side tip, I encourage you to go out and practice your composition skills on flowers, on things around your neighborhood, because this will help you become a better photographer, that when you go out on a workshop, whether it's with me or with someone else, you are able to do a little bit easier visualization and being able to see what kind of works, whether it's the rule of 2/3, or if it's other rules that we go by, or other rules that we know that we go by, but then sometimes we break. And you know, it's just really handy to take that time for you to kind of go through and look at the composition and look at the lines. And even in the evening, if you're on a workshop, I would encourage you to then bring up the images, you know, like I did, on a tablet, and say, well, why does this work, or why does it not work? And what could I improve the next time I go out and shoot, when I'm shooting a scene kind of like this. I hope you've enjoyed this brief video on composition and some of the things that I find very useful when I'm out shooting, and look forward to seeing you in another video again real soon. Bye for now.